Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell again. Let's talk about how humans and human activities affect soil. For one thing, soil helps us live, and we probably don't think much about that. But you can imagine that a lot of the food we eat comes from the soil. And not only the food we eat, but if we eat animals, such as cows and pigs and so on, they eat grass that comes from the soil. Now, there are some things you can eat that don't come from the soil, but a surprisingly high number of them actually do. There are other things that help us live because of the soil, or other ways the soil help us live. Cotton, medicines, lumber, they all come from plants that emerge from the soil. And one thing you might not have thought about, soil helps purify water. As water falls down from rainfall and ends up getting mixed in with whatever happens to be on the soil, as it is absorbed into the soil kind of acts as a filter before it ends up running out into some stream or river. Also, soil provides a home for many living things. Now, one thing that affects the soil that we humans do is farming. One thing about farming is the effect of fertilizer. We have talked about in this chapter how fertilizer can help things grow. It adds more organic material in the soil, but fertilizer that you purchase at a store will also have chemicals in it. And if you use fertilizer, it can affect the living things in the soil. By adding the excess chemicals to the soil, those chemicals could end up being drained into lakes and rivers to some degree. That's why some people prefer to have organically grown food. You may have heard of organically grown tomatoes. If you're growing things organically, you are not using fertilizers bought from stores that would have chemicals. Another thing that we affect the soil with in farming is loss of natural plant cover. You know, many times farmers and people just clear out big areas of land, or maybe they allow their animals to overgraze on the land, leaving the soil completely exposed. And when the soil is completely exposed in large areas, there's more of a chance that wind or rain can either blow it away or wash it away. It's possible that exposure of the land can lead to something called desertification, and I wish I had typed that in, but I did not. Desertification. Desertification is the expansion of desert-like conditions. You know, desert-like conditions would not have good topsoil, if any topsoil. Expansion of desert conditions where natural plants have been destroyed. That's what desertification is. Another thing we humans do to affect the soil is construction. The making and building of roads, houses, hospitals, skyscrapers, and so on, means digging up the soil. And when you have stacks of removed soil, those stacks of removed soil often blow away or washed away. And it is very hard to replace the soil. It takes many years for it to be built or for it to be made. Mining is another thing we do that affect the soil, and it kind of does the same thing that construction does. If you have a strip or open pit mine, it is removing soil and pushing it to the side. And the danger here is that the soil will also be blown away or washed away, just like in construction. One other thing about mining, it speeds up the weathering process. because you have rocks that are suddenly exposed to the elements that were underground before. There's actually rocks that are made of sulfide that when exposed to rainwater will cause sulfuric acid. And sulfuric acid can pollute the areas around it, kind of a natural pollution, you might say, but you still don't want the pollution. Let's talk about conservation methods. What can we do to help save the soil? Now, all of these that we have right here are things that farmers do to save the soil. So let's see what these are. Crop rotation is planting different crops in the same field in different years. Different crops. For example, if you have a lot of land, in one section one year you may plant soybeans. It is wise not to plant the same thing in the same land every year. So the next year you might could plant something different here. You might could plant something like corn. And throughout all your sections of land, you probably have things that are planted. So a wise farmer might have soybeans here one year and then rotate it here one year. They might have corn here and then rotate it to something else such as cotton, and just have some kind of crop rotation. And it doesn't have to be 6 different areas. It could even be 2 different areas. And just have one crop go to the other side of the field one year, and then the next year it would rotate back. Another conservation method is conservation tillage. You know, the fewer times the land is plowed or tilled, there's the less chance the soil is blown or washed away. So the fewer times you plow it up, the less chances of eroding or washing away. There's even something called no-till farming. That means you don't use a tractor at all to plow up the land, and the soil doesn't blow away near as easy if it's not plowed up. Another conservation method is terraces. Terraces are flat, step-like areas for farming. If you have a mountain and you make an area flat, and you make another area flat, and another area flat, and another area flat, these places that are flat is where you can do your planting. And the reason you do that is because the soil isn't blown or washed away primarily by rain. If you have rain that's falling down and it stays on the terrace, then it's not washed away as if it were a straight up hill. The rain, of course, would slide down the hill much easier because of the gravity. Kind of a similar thing in contour plowing. Contour plowing is also on hills, but it's plowing the hillsides in curves. Curved plowing, and I have a picture of that here in a little bit, but the curved plowing slows off any runoff water inside the curves. Sometimes strips of grass are even planted there to help slow down the runoff. And windbreaks is another example of conservation. That's when you plant trees between fields to break the wind and to protect the soil near the trees. So if you have row of trees that are planted, any soil that is around will not get all the wind that would be broken by these trees, so it would help conserve the soil that happens to be on the other side. Now what I happen to have next are some pictures. Here's a picture of soil runoff. You have the soil that is being washed away. And once it's washed away, it's kind of hard to get back, you might say. Now here we have a big open field. Now the danger of a big open field like this is if you have wind or if you have lots of rain, it kind of gets washed away. And of course it's going to go to like a river or a stream, but the odds of it coming back right to place of a lot of other soil is not quite as good. So if given a chance, these wide open fields kind of hurt the conservation of soil. Here's where we have a no-till area of land. You can see they did not plow, or at least you can tell there's like a little grass and plants type stuff in between. Now what happens there is you have like an injector that would inject these seeds individually, so you wouldn't have to plow in a no-till plant. And the reason to have no-till is because if you don't have the ground tilled up, like here you have the ground tilled up, you have been through here with a tractor and have tilled the ground, but here you haven't, and the wind would take this dirt soil away much easier than it would take this soil away. Have some more pictures. Here's an example of farming with terraces off to the left here. You can see how I think this is corn. It's kind of hard to tell in the distance, but you can see you kind of have this little flat area, so when it rains the water doesn't completely go down the hill. Kind of these built up little flat areas here. Here's what we have here. This is a windbreak. Windbreaks, remember, planting trees in between the fields. Now what happens is if you get all this wind coming right here, let's see what I'm doing here. You get all this wind, this field over here is protected by this wind break, and it's not going to lose the soil near as much. And here is an example of contour plowing. You may remember contour plowing is plowing in curves, and sometimes you even have things planted in between the curves to kind of slow down the runoff. This slows down the runoff that you would get from rainwater.